Okay, we're going to talk about how to dig your own clay. Um, Here I went up to the Byington boat ramp. If you go through the parking lot, you're going to get some grouping of trees. You go through that by a canal, and they have this dug up where they were digging up the road for the canal. And so I just filled up my buckets there with the dirt in that cut. So here I'm adding water to the buckets. I want to make sure to fill these buckets up to about 3 or 4 inches above the dirt. So I'm going to fill it all the way up, let that water really soak in, get the clay really nice and wet. It's going to help separate the clay from the dirt itself. So here I'm just adding that water. Then I kind of gently, well, I guess not real gently, I mix it together, try to break up the clumps of dirt, get it all separated and suspended in the water. Here I'm mixing it up really quickly, making sure that water is suspended in the clay is suspended in the water, and then I'm just dumping it into a nice clean bucket, straining out the large chunks. To strain it out, what I did is I just got actually these rain gutter leaf guards. I had them in my garage. I was going to go buy a kitchen strainer. Then I saw these on my way into the garage and I was like, wait, I think this will work just fine. So it's just a big grid, and on the back there's a mesh screen behind it, so it's just like a strainer. So you can see this clay does have quite a bit of large debris in it, rocks and grass, which is to be expected. So I'm just straining it out, it gets clogged up, I empty it out, make sure it is clean. And then this is what's left over in the bucket. You can see large rocks, stuff that's not clay. Here's on the strainer, the same thing. Then I let it sit for overnight actually, and you can see the water separated from the clay. So up top you get that almost clear water. That's actually going to get dumped off in this next step. So here I'm just putting a pillowcase into another clean bucket. The pillowcase doesn't necessarily matter, but what I found, at least this one, is the pillowcase I had was actually really thick, and it made it so it took a little bit longer to get the clay dry as I would like it. I have another segment where the other bucket I use a thinner fabric, which was a lot faster, ended up only taking a day, whereas this one's taken almost a week. So here you can see I'm just gently pouring out the top layer of that bucket. It started with all the clear water, and then it's getting a little bit of brown coming out, which is just a little bit of that dirt. This first go around, I left a little bit more water in the bucket than I feel like I should have. You'll see I kind of dumped that out several different times. Those pieces I'm pulling out right now are not sticks. They look like it. They're actually pieces of ice because it's still ridiculously cold here in Idaho. And so here I am. I'm going to come over and pour it in the pillowcase. Decided I want to pour a little bit more of that water off. Looking back, I should have put even more water off of it. And now I just pour it in. I'm going to empty it out carefully, trying not to let it spill anywhere. You'll see this in a second, but there's a little bit of clay in the bottom, so I'm just going to hit the bucket and get as much of that clay there out as I can. I let it settle probably a little bit too long in there while it was separating. It's all trial and error though, right? So here I'm just getting some of that clay out. And now I'm going to take that pillowcase and I'm going to tie it up and let it hang, just kind of basically to drip dry. So the water can strain out of there. It's a smaller particle. The clay will then be suspended. See, this is the second bucket. I have a little thinner fabric. I'm just going to dump it into the bucket with the fabric. See, it's actually already kind of solidifying because I dumped more of that water out. Then I just hung it up off of a nail in my garage. Let it drip down in. You see it's dripping in there, little water droplets. This, like I said, it's only been hanging for about a day and it's already pretty close. Next, you just want to make sure that while it's drying, you kind of massage that, almost knead or wedge that clay. Here, I wedged it a little bit in the bag. The best practice, though, is once it starts setting up, go ahead and open it up. Kind of play around with that clay and wedge it around. You'll see it's kind of hard to tell, but there was some really wet clay on top versus the clay that was touching the fabric is a little more dry. So now I'm just kind of wedging it, mixing it around, any clay that's a little bit drier, I'm making sure to break it up so it's nice and soft and allows that really moist clay still to kind of absorb and dry out a little bit and help the clay that's a little drier get a little wet. Here's the pillowcase one. You can see it's really runny still and it's been hanging for 3 days. Now, given part of that, we did have an issue where we had a big rainstorm while it was outside. So it got wet, so I decided to go and hang both of them in the garage. So here's that pillowcase one again. I'm going to untie it. And you'll see it's pretty wet. I did end up wrapping it in a towel as well to help. That towel will help absorb some of that water. And what it does really is it helps absorb that moisture. So here's that clay in the pillowcase. You can see it's pretty wet. After moving it into the garage after the rainstorm and wrapping it in that towel, you can see it's gonna actually took all that water out in just a day, and it really changed the water content of that clay. So here's that finished product. You can see it's dried out really nicely. We have that nice brown clay, kind of a little bit of red in there. So if I were to do this again, I would definitely use that thinner fabric instead of that really thick pillowcase I had. Now, other pillowcases would be just fine. This one was just super thick. And then I would definitely dump out a little bit more water like I did the second time around. Some other things that are important to know, though, is you can get this clay to come from pretty much any dirt. It's just the amount of clay that you're going to get is going to vary. So I found a location that had some pretty good signs of there being clay there, which just made it easier to get a lot more clay throughout this process. Now, just digging up some dirt out of the ground, odds are you're going to get it, but you might end up with only like a little handful by the time you're done with this. So that's why I went up to that location. There's plenty of dirt there. You guys can all welcome to go dig there. Really, you just have to try it if it's not working out, and you might do several different locations and just fill a little jar of clay. You don't need to do a whole bucket like I did. That might be a better bet if you're not sure if there's clay. Just do a small amount in little like mason jars, and then from there, if you find like it's a good clay source, go back to that location and dig up some more. I hope this helps and you're able to be successful like I was in your endeavors in digging and making your own clay.